1. This literally just happened a few moments ago. I'm a very skeptical person, so I don't usually get caught up, thinking random people are out to mess with me. But this scenario just really caught me off guard. Everything made sense, and it nearly made me shiver when I realized it was not all in my head. I work from home, and my sleep schedule gets pretty much backwards at times. This means I usually find myself getting hungry in the late hours of the night. At these times, usually past midnight, only a couple of places are open. One of these is a 24/7 Carl's Jr./Green Burrito restaurant. It's the closest 24-hour fast food place from my house, and I like their fried zucchini, so I find myself going there a few times a week. Whenever I go there past 1 a.m. or so, there's always this same guy alone. Never have I gone there late, and there has been a different worker. He's pretty tall, I'd estimate at least 6 feet, somewhat slim, and probably in his late 20s or early 30s. I think he's just white, but could also possibly be Armenian or some kind of lighter-skinned Middle Eastern. Anyways, it was just a couple of hours ago at 2:30 a.m. when I decided I was going to go to the 24/7 Carl's Jr. for some food. When I arrived, they played the usual pre-recorded promotional offer and I said no thank you. Then the guy on the speaker asked me if I could just pull up to the window. While I've never been asked this over a working speaker at any other fast food place, it didn't really strike me as out of the ordinary. I pulled up to the window, and before placing my order, that guy, the one that is always there alone at this time, asks me if he can just change the battery on his device really quick. I couldn't really tell exactly what it was, but I'm guessing it had to do with the ordering system, possibly. After a few minutes, he comes to the window and asks for my order. I order a jalapeno double cheeseburger and a side of fried zucchini. I give him my card, and after a minute or so he returns it. Now I've ordered this same exact thing over 20 times. At this same exact time, while the same employee was working alone. Every single other time I ordered it, he had it finished in a few minutes at the most. Never did I have to wait longer than that. The first thing I noticed was that it was taking longer than usual. I had probably been waiting for about 10 minutes at this point. At least twice as long as I ever waited for this fast food meal that's basically already prepared. Then I noticed something a bit strange. When you look into the window where you pay, on the right side is the indoor counter with the cash registers, and on the left side is the kitchen area, with a dim window allowing you to see in. A couple minutes before I received my food, I saw the guy doing something on the far side of the room. I found it odd, as he spent a couple minutes there, and it looked like he was messing with something small. All of the food prep stations were in the room to the left, and if he was putting the burger together, I expect I'd see a lot more arm movement. This is the first thing that seemed a bit strange to me. This is where it gets really weird. I've ordered this same thing from this same guy quite a few times, so the past few or so he's thrown ranch into a bag without me asking. As he starts approaching the window with the bag of food, I turn over and, clear as day, I see him grab one single ranch and toss it into the bag. It wouldn't be until later that this detail became really creepy. I drove home, brought the food into my room, sat at my desk, and started eating as I watched shows on my computer. Beside the food, he also put in some napkins, a couple ketchup packets, and exactly 3 ranch cups. The kind that are a hard plastic cup with a plastic peel on top. I opened up the ranch cup so I could dip the fried zucchini in it. After a little while, I finished the burger and most of the fried zucchini. There were only a couple left, but the ranch was gone, so I decided to open another. This was the moment it all hit me at once, like I was watching a good mystery show, and I finally got the telling hint. This second ranch cup opened much, much too easy. I've eaten a good share of fast food in my life, so I've opened tons of these cups of sauce. So when the plastic seal slid right open without any resistance whatsoever, I immediately knew something was off. And that important detail came rushing back into my head. I, 100% clear as day, as the guy was approaching the window with the food. Saw him grab only a single ranch and throw it into the bag. That memory was literally the first thing that came to my mind when I opened the second ranch cup. I quickly grabbed the third and last ranch, and I already knew what was going to happen. The plastic peeled right off, and even easier than the first cup. Instantly, all I could think about were the details. This order, the same order I've gotten 20 times in the past, that took 5 minutes at the most every single time, took an entire 15 minutes this day. After about 10 minutes or so, I see the guy in the back of the counter area messing with something small for a couple of minutes. It doesn't seem like he's prepping food because he's only making slight movements with his arms. When he approaches me with the bag, I see him grab one ranch cup and toss it into the bag. Not only am I sure I saw this, I'm sure that he put sauce into the bag on 2 different occasions. As there was also ketchup in the bag, and even if he somehow grabbed 3 ranches, which it definitely looked like one, he didn't also grab any ketchup at that time. I was looking right at him. I know this all may sound coincidental, but I can't stop thinking about it as it makes, well, too much sense. Even though I saw him only throw 1 ranch into the bag, it never surprised me when I saw 3 ranches and a few ketchups in the bag. That's why I trust my response to opening these other 2 ranch cups. The ones that opened way too easily, so easily that the realization that they had already been opened hit me like a ton of bricks. If this is all possibly true, and he did open those ranch cups, it must have been what he was messing with on the counter in the back. Maybe that's where he was using some kind of adhesive to seal them back up. But what none of this can truly answer: what did he put in my food? I didn't actually tear the seals completely off the 2 suspicious ranch cups, so I actually taped the tops down with gaffer tape. Put them in the plastic baggie and into the fridge. I know it sounds silly, but if he really did try to put something in my food, I might be able to figure it out with those. Even somehow being able to tell if there's a different adhesive than the normal one used to seal those sauce cups would literally be nearly conclusive that it was tampered with. Tell me what you guys think. I'm kind of freaked out. I don't feel that odd, other than a weird feeling that I kinda want to gag. But I figure that's just me imagining what could have been done to my food. Well, I feel safe as I didn't use those weird ranch cups, and only the one that had a tough seal. Who knows what he might have done to my burger as well. Needless to say, I'll never be eating there again, and I'll probably start trying to cook more. 2. This happened last year, and I'm thankful that it didn't end poorly. Back then, I was renting a workshop office space for my small business. I make kids' clothes in the downtown area of my city. I hadn't bothered to put up signage outside at all because the space was used as a workshop and storage for production, so very few customers would ever be coming by. I also didn't post the address on my business cards. The city is better known as the Armpit of Ontario. The south side houses a lot of crime and drug dealers. Naturally, some of those folks end up downtown during the day because there's a methadone clinic nearby. But I'd never had a problem. My space was at the back of the building, and the other offices were used by companies with little to no foot traffic outside of their regular staff. My staff came in on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I would go in by myself on the odd Tuesday if there was enough work to support it. When they're alone, despite being a tiny woman, I never locked the main office door until after 5 p.m. because I felt safe. On this particular Tuesday, I'm working away in the middle of the day at the back of the office. I'm playing music because I'm solo and trying to stay motivated. Somehow over the music I hear the hinges of my front door squeak like someone's just come in. For reference, the main door to my office opens to a hallway. My office has 4 rooms, 1 large workshop to the left of the entrance, 1 smaller office directly across from the entrance, and 2 offices off to the right. The farthest one to the right is what I call the back room. Oh, and there's no bell or anything when the front door is opened. After hearing the squeaky hinges, I pop my head out of the back and see no one at the door or in the hallway. I also don't hear the door close at all or any footsteps, just the squeak. When I look out, the door is still closed and everything looks fine, but something in my gut is saying to double check. So I start walking up the hallway toward the main room. As I get to the entrance, I casually turn my head to glance in the room directly across from the entrance, and I'm instantly terrified. There's a woman standing in there in the dark, looking back at me, pupils like saucers. I'm startled as shit, but my brain hasn't caught up enough to make me get the fuck out of my office, despite having a super creepy vibe. Instead, I quickly walk into the main workroom and loudly say, "Can I help you with something?" briefly turning my back to this stranger. The woman follows me into the room and doesn't reply. Creepy as fuck. The workroom has a giant crafting table in the middle, and box cutters we use regularly on the table. Because the box cutters are no more than a tool for me, I don't even remember or notice they are there. Trying to put space between me and this person, I walk to the far side of the table so it's kind of in between us. This woman still hasn't responded and is now staring blankly at me. I repeat myself louder and wait, still no response. She then picks up a shopping bag from a rack by the door and starts moving toward a table that has orders waiting for pickup. At this point, because she's creeping me out, I say, "Look, it's time to leave. You're not welcome here, and there are no scheduled pickups today." I wonder if I'm speaking in a different language because there's still no response. But by this point, I've got goosebumps at the creep factor. She takes a few steps toward me and starts looking around the room. I instinctively back up. She still hasn't said anything. After a minute, her eyes fix on the box cutters on the table, and I'm instantly filled with dread. She's now closer to the table than me, and quickly puts her hand on the closest knife. Then, staring directly in my eyes, she says, "I'm not fucking leaving." At this point, my brain is in full panic. I realize I'm either about to get stabbed or robbed or both. But by now she's blocking my path toward the only exit. A million things are going through my mind. Somehow I make the snap decision to run past her toward the door, and I go screaming down the hall for help. Almost instantly, 10 guys come barreling out of the neighboring office. Luckily for me, there was a staff meeting that day. I quickly explain what happened and they all go into my office where this chick is now stuffing items in her oversized purse. We all go back in and I see both box cutters are now back on the table. The guys tell her to leave and she doesn't respond. Finally, one of the guys takes a few steps toward her and she points at me and says, "She told me I could look around." The guy says back, "Yeah, and donkeys fly. Put back wherever you just stuffed in your purse and leave." She doesn't budge. And dude finally loses his patience. He grabs her arm and starts forcing her toward the door. She finally leaves, but I call the cops. The best part, the cops don't even come to take a report. They tell me on the phone that because she didn't say, "I'll stab you," or verbally threaten me, there's nothing much to report, unless I can tell them exactly what she took. I call back after a quick inventory, and no one from law enforcement shows up until a week later. There's video of her in the main lobby for the offices, so I offer that to them. I also give a description of her and repeat what happened. Turns out they know exactly who she is. She's a known drug addict and prostitute, who has a long rap sheet and is prone to violence. How she found her way into my workshop or why, I'll never know, but to this day it still gives me the creeps. So, sketchy streetwalker, let's not meet. 3. I've had my fair share of weird and creepy encounters, but this one stands out as the most memorable. For starters, I'm a teenage guy and I'm semi-openly gay. With that out of the way, let's talk about my first experience with Grindr. This happened a little over 2 years ago when I'd gotten my first phone. I got a phone way later than most people my age. At first, nothing really changed. I'd already gone years without having a phone while everyone else had one, so I wasn't immediately addicted like most people. Part of that might have been because I didn't have many friends to text, and another part might have been because I was pretty used to not using one in the first place. It takes a bit to get me out of my shell, so it's rare that I meet or become friends with new people, but After a couple of months of having my phone, I started using apps like Tinder because it was easier for socially awkward me to talk to people over the internet than it was for me to meet new people in person. I never talked to the people there for more than a couple of weeks because I was always too afraid to meet in person. Eventually, I caught on to what people were really using apps like Tinder for, though. They were all just looking for a quick fuck. I started coming around to that idea when I heard about Grindr. Being the young, lonely guy coming to terms with being gay, I jumped at the opportunity to talk to other people like me. Naively, I thought Grindr was just like Tinder for gays, but I learned quickly how wrong I was. My experience with Tinder was that people usually around my age, pretending to be interested in you, they'd strike up a conversation and ask you about yourself before subtly hinting at a chance for sex. Grindr dropped all pretense. The dudes there knew what they wanted and weren't shy about telling you. Not to mention they were all much older. I'd always known people were going to be a few years older than me. I'd lied about my age to make the account after all. Believe me, I know how stupid that is. But it was rare that I'd find someone that wasn't 10 years older than me. So of course when I did find someone who was, and who didn't immediately ask to see my dick, or ask when I wanted to meet up to be their plaything, I was pleasantly surprised. His profile said his name was John, that he was only 18, and that he lived on the other side of town, so within reach but far enough away that I felt safe. It didn't hurt that he was pretty cute too. John and I started talking, and to me it seemed like something clicked. He was funny, we had similar interests, he never asked about sex, and whenever I was stressed or needed to vent about something, he listened and offered usually pretty sound advice. So of course after talking for over a month, I grew to trust him. And one night out of the blue I decided he should know I wasn't 18 like my profile said I was, if he and I were ever going to be a thing. Not that that was something we ever talked about, it was just a stupid hope of mine at the time. He took it well and said that he suspected I was because of how often I talked about school, but that he didn't mind seeing as he was only a couple of years older than me. After that, it felt like we only grew closer. We talked every day and I started to tell him more and more about myself, what I did most days, etc. So when I told him I was going to the mall with my friend Lynn to do Christmas shopping, it wasn't weird. As a little side note, at the time on the Grindr app, there was a feature to let you know how far away people were from you. Lynn and I went about our day at the mall and had a merry old time. Another side note, Lynn was one of the only people in the world at the time that knew I was gay, and maybe because of that, I had a huge crush on him. Don't ask me how that makes sense. We eventually decided to get a bite to eat at the food court, and while we were eating I checked my phone and, more importantly, Grindr. When I looked at John's profile it said he was only a few hundred feet away, which was weird seeing as we'd always been a few miles apart. But I didn't think much of it because it was the mall, after all. There were hundreds of people there. We had a brief conversation on the app that went something like this. Me, having fun stalking me at the mall? LOL. Him, I was, but now I think I'm more interested in your friend. Me, asshole, LOL. Him, just kidding. You're the only one I have eyes for. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the rest of the day went on as normal. But looking back on it now, that convo makes my skin crawl. Even though we were joking, he never denied the stalking, and according to the app, he clearly was there. He knew what I looked like, roughly, because of my Grindr profile, so it really isn't a stretch to say he was watching my friend and I while we were shopping and eating. New Year's Eve rolled around, and by then John and I had been talking for what seemed like forever. But on that night I was with Lynn and my other two friends, celebrating at one of their houses. The friend whose house we were gathered at, Nick, had managed to score some liquor and raided their parents' fridge of its beer, so it goes without saying that most of us were drunk. For a little context, Nick lived on the other side of town from me, and my parents had dropped me off at his house to spend the night there. We kept drinking, hooting, hollering, wrestling around, and God knows what else. The countdown on the TV was a few minutes from midnight, so despite our drunken antics, we settled into the couches to watch the countdown. I was next to Lynn on the 3-person couch with another friend on the other side of him, while Nick sat in the love seat by himself. A lot of factors went into what happened when the countdown hit midnight. Most of it was the amount of alcohol I had consumed previously, but the close proximity along with the wrestling we'd been doing didn't help either, not to mention my already enormous crush on Lynn. So when the countdown ended and I turned to see Lynn looking at me, I leant in and kissed him, while the other two went back to hooting and hollering again. He of course shoved me away and yelled, "What the fuck?" He was pissed clearly, but he didn't make any moves to try to kick my ass, so I took that as a good sign and tried to explain myself. He, however, wasn't having it. He just told me to fuck off before I could finish and called me a fucking faggot. By then, Nick and our other friend had calmed down and they were staring at us. Drunk, embarrassed, and more than a little emotionally hurt, I just got up and made my way for the door. Nick tried to stop me, but the other two didn't say anything, so I just kept walking. As I mentioned earlier, I lived on the opposite side of town, so I don't really know what my idea was, but I kept on walking in the general direction of where I lived. Which might have been an okay plan if I hadn't been drunk, there hadn't been a foot of snow on the ground, and it hadn't been freezing fucking cold. After walking for a few minutes, I decided to hide in a bus shelter at an intersection to warm up. While I was warming up, I got out my phone and looked at any messages on Grindr, because I'd been too busy being drunk earlier. John and I hadn't really been talking, but I quickly started pouring my heart out to him and telling him that I was going to freeze to death outside. Dramatic, I know. After doing his best to comfort me, he suggested that he could give me a ride home because the app said I was only a couple miles away from him, and that he wasn't just going to let me freeze to death trying to get home. I'm not proud of it, but because I wasn't in the best state of mind, I agreed and sent him my location. What happened over the next hour was easily the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and likely is to happen to me. A few minutes passed and a truck slowly pulled up to where I was sitting. I wasn't sure if it was John, so I waited there hoping he would make some gesture or something for me to get in, which of course didn't happen. The door opened and I took that as my cue. It was a big truck, so I had to put a little effort into pulling myself in. Because I was caught up doing that and it was dark in the truck, I never actually got a good look at the guy at the wheel. I say guy because he clearly didn't look anything like John's profile picture did. John was much older than 18. I'm not good at estimating ages, but if I had to, I'd say he looked at least 50. His face was deeply lined and he was sporting grey stubble, and his hair was clearly thinning. After I stared at him for a minute, he quietly said, "Hi," and grabbed my hand for a shake. His hands were massive and almost made my own look like a kid's. He was a heavier set guy, but it was clear he was strong. Looking back, I think he probably worked construction or something. He started driving and we made some small talk, but it was clear I was very uncomfortable, so he eventually shut up. I wasn't trying to be rude, but he clearly wasn't what he portrayed himself as. We'd hardly been driving for 5 minutes, though, before I realized we were heading in the opposite direction of my house. I laughed a little and said, "Guess I forgot to let you know I live in the other direction, on the other side of town." He responded with a slow, as if he were agreeing, but he didn't make any indication of turning. "I can give you the address," I said after a moment. He looked at me a little at the mention of that, but still didn't slow down. If I hadn't been worried before, I definitely was now. I started looking around to see what I recognized and reached for my phone, but as I was starting to get past the lock screen, he asked what the address was. I calmly told him that if he pulled over, I could pull it up on my phone so he would have directions. He mumbled something but did pull into the parking lot of a church that I recognized and shut off the engine. I was pretty much shitting my pants, but I was able to open my phone. While I held my phone in one hand, my other crept slowly for the door handle. I wasn't going to stick in that car any longer. So while I pretended to fumble with my phone a bit, I quickly tried to pull the handle only to find the door was locked. Not a second later, I felt a huge smack on the side of my head that left my ears ringing and my head spinning, even more than it was when I'd been drinking earlier. I was able to unlock the truck's door, but not before taking another hard smack to the head, and afterwards I stumbled and basically fell out of the truck, dropping my phone in the process. After probably taking far too much time orienting myself, picking up my phone to find a completely shattered screen, and trying to stand up, I started wobbling away. I heard John yelling, but I didn't know what he was saying. My ears were still ringing, and I was getting farther and farther away from the truck. What did register, though, was the unmistakable sound of a truck engine starting. I started trying to make my shaky legs run, but it wasn't going nearly as well as I would have liked. I knew where I was. The church parking lot we'd pulled into was only a few blocks away from Nick's house. So after stumbling some more, and full-on tripping once, my legs started working a little more efficiently. Unfortunately, that had left John more than enough time to drive his truck up next to me with the windows rolled down. He was telling me he was sorry, and that to just get into the truck. After realizing that wouldn't work, he pulled in front of me completely, almost running over me in the process, and opened the driver's side door. The crazy fuck had gotten out of his truck, and I just knew he was going to beat me unconscious. Still, my head was getting clearer, and every second my legs started cooperating more and more, so I was able to avoid him and start full-on sprinting out of the parking lot and down the street. I tripped more than a couple of times, mind you, but I was fast enough to get away from John while he was on foot. I was scrambling down the sidewalk, trying to find my way before John could catch up in his truck, but all the houses in that area were essentially the same, and even if I hadn't had any difficulty finding Nick's place, I couldn't just lead John there. I was still running on the sidewalk when I heard John's truck behind me. Deciding there was no way I was going to get away from him in the open like this, I started trying my hardest to run through the snow of a park that I knew would put me on the wrong road to make it to Nick's house, but I had a plan. Knowing he couldn't very well follow me in his truck through the park, and that he'd never catch me on foot, I turned around to see John zooming down the road, presumably to put himself on the other side of the park by the time I'd make it across the snow-covered field, which was exactly what I'd hoped he would do. I waited a few seconds before making my way back to the sidewalk I'd just been running on, and started sprinting down the streets once again. It was only a couple of minutes before I made it to Nick's house, and John's truck was nowhere in sight, but I still looped around and ran through the backyards of the houses on Nick's street, just to make sure he wouldn't know where my friends were. When I eventually did make it to Nick's house, I started slamming my hand on his door as loud as I could, without drawing the attention of anyone else. To my surprise, it wasn't Nick that answered, but Lynn. For a moment I was about to start weeping because part of me figured he'd just slam the door and leave me out there. He didn't, of course. He wasn't a monster, and even if I had pissed him off, anyone could see that I was in rough shape. Lynn hurried me in and woke up Nick so he could help me clean up. It was in Nick's bathroom that I discovered just how rough of a shape I was in. There was dried blood all down the left side of my head, coming from my ear, but as far as any of us could tell, there was no cut in or on my ear. Who knows what that means? But what was more concerning were all the huge scrapes on my elbows, knees, and a pretty big one in my forehead. I hadn't thought I'd fallen that hard, but I guess the adrenaline and alcohol had dulled my senses enough that I hadn't felt it. After they'd helped me patch myself up, I stripped out of my soaked clothes and borrowed some from Nick. I finally had time to be overwhelmed. I started crying loudly in the living room while everyone was now awake and watching awkwardly. They'd asked what happened. I told them some guys tried to jump me. A lie, but somehow it seemed preferable to telling them a stranger I'd been talking to on Grindr for months now, and who had been by all accounts a friend to me, picked me up in his truck where he had tried to abduct me. I don't know when I got to Nick's house, but it was almost 4 a.m. by the time I had decided it was safe to sleep. Unfortunately, I didn't get to sleep in to recover from my night the next day, because we all had to clean Nick's house before his parents got home. When I woke up though, Lynn was on the floor next to me, a few feet away, but there was a couch open, and he'd opted to sleep on the floor with me, which had to have been a good sign. It was. We're still friends today. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories episode 254. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I want to bring something up. Some of you may have heard of it, that the YouTube is changing its policies regarding partnership status. They're essentially going to be taking partnership status away from a lot of channels, a lot of smaller channels, even smaller than my own. I'm fortunate that, at least for the moment, I seem to meet those requirements, so I should be able to keep my partnership status, and I'll be able to continue to do this for a living, but that's at least for the moment. So what I wanted to say is, if there are channels out there whose content you like and you watch quite frequently, but you might not have subscribed to, because it turns out there was actually quite a few channels that I had that with, ones like The Horror Guru, Count Jacula, and Techmon, and Anderton's TV. Those channels were all ones whose content I watched quite frequently, but I realised I'd never actually gotten around to hitting the subscribe button. So I made sure I corrected that today, so that hopefully some of those channels are smaller than others, some of them are quite big actually. But if you find, like me, there are channels you watch a lot and you just haven't subscribed to, then maybe hit the subscribe button, watch a few extra videos, maybe help get their view time up as well, because that's another factor. Okay, rant over. I'm going to head off. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.